Okay. So I see some people are trickling in, so we're just going to wait a minute before we get started, just to let those that are joining, just to let you guys know.
Oh, okay.
John.
Oh boy. Of course, something like that has to happen.
It's all right.
I am going to be right back, actually.
It's okay. I'll do the housekeeping stuff anyway. All right. Well, we are going to get started while John takes a minute. I'm going to just go over some housekeeping stuff. So first of all, welcome everybody to this week's virtual meetup hosted by the Epilepsy Foundation of Wisconsin. Some of you may know me. My name is Alicia Thompson. I'm the program manager for the foundation. Very excited tonight. We actually have two speakers with us. So John and then Sarah. Sarah, if you just want to wave, say hello. Thank you. They are going to be sharing a little bit about their experience with living independently. We're going to talk about that and how they manage their epilepsy. They're going to answer some questions. It's going to be a Q&A style. And then when I wrap up my questions, we're going to open it up to everybody else. So something I just want to let you know that if you're an attendee, you are muted and your video is off, but we do encourage questions. So please ask. John and Sarah they welcome your questions. You can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen there and you can type them in. Feel free to do that throughout the call. Otherwise, you can wait until the very end when I open it up for questions. That's just fine. Something I forgot to mention in the very beginning, we are recording this and I legally have to let you guys know that. The cool thing is it's going to be up on our website within the next few days after we're done tonight. We have a video library, so if you go to epilepsywisconsin.org, you will find the recording in that video library. So very cool. Let me just see if there's anything else. I don't think so. So with that being said, we're going to get into intros for John and Sarah, and we're actually going to do that. I'm going to ask you guys some questions. So John, we're just going to start with you since you're a colleague of mine. So I guess let's start off with, when were you diagnosed and kind of describe that experience and maybe what seizure types that you have, if you go ahead.
Well, I was diagnosed in 1991. It was a few months after I graduated from college, and I was getting ready to start another program at Loyola University in Chicago. And the students in our program, this was a Catholic university, so everybody had to go on a retreat over the weekend before classes started. And so while we had some free time, there were many of us outside playing volleyball. And I was playing volleyball, and all of a sudden I was in a hospital. And that was the result of what many people today know as a grand mal seizure or a tonic-clonic seizure. And that was the very first seizure I had. And I had no idea what the problem was. So based on that, I had gotten in touch with a neurologist and some medication. And tonic-clonic or grand mal seizure wasn't the type I normally have. It's usually, to answer your question, much more complex partial or simple partial seizures, or what in the past people would have known as petit mal.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And then can you maybe talk a little bit, along with your intro, kind of how seizures have impacted, I guess, your life overall? So kind of a big question, but I think it's a good one to start with.
The impact of the seizures for me actually was delayed because medicine took care of it right away. From 1991 until about 1998, I did not have to deal with seizures at all. I just took one pill once a day for almost 8 years, and it took care of the problem. So I really didn't think about it much. I had to see a neurologist once a year to get a refill, and it was almost as if I just didn't even have it. It didn't really start affecting, I was able to continue driving. I was able to continue doing what I did for work. It didn't really affect me all that much until about 1998, somewhere in that neighborhood, when seizures started to return. So the impact at that point, epilepsy was in the back of my mind. It was just, yeah, I've got it, but it doesn't really seem to do much. It's really no big deal. That's when it hit me hard though, because over the course of the next few years, I had to give up driving and give up my dream job, which was being a high school teacher. And that's what I did for about 7 years. And then I had to give it up because of epilepsy. So that's during that that time frame, I was living alone, but things were going to have to change. So the impact really kind of started just before 2000.
All right. Thank you, John. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll get to some more questions on you living independently in just a minute. But let's go over to Sarah. Sarah, so if you could answer the same question. So when were you diagnosed, and kind of how did you, respond to that when you were initially diagnosed?
Sure. So I was 13 when I was diagnosed, and I had a series of grand mal or tonic-clonic seizures, and it turned into status epilepticus. And I was taken to the hospital, couldn't stop it. So I was put into a medical-induced coma and was in the hospital for about a month. And for me, my response to it was just extreme denial. I mean, I was 13 years old, and just overnight everything changed, and I had absolutely no memory of it. So for me, it was just complete denial. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to believe it. Nothing made sense to me. I didn't have any memory of it. So the seizure started to taper off and became more under control. And historically, I've had, since my initial diagnosis, either simple partial or complex partial or nocturnal seizures, and I currently have simple partial seizures.
Okay, so two very different time frames for diagnosis between the two of you. So yeah. And then if you could also answer how have they impacted your life overall? So again, that's a bigger question, but if you just want to talk a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, once my seizures started to become under control, then it's kind of like John. It was just like, okay, things are good here, and I do what my mom tells me to do, and I complain about it a lot because I'm a teenager, and then I resist going to doctor's appointments, and I act like a jerk, but whatever, and everything's kind of sort of okay. And I continued just really every once in a while having simple partial seizures, and then went about 4 years without having one, and in 2012 I started having simple partial seizures on a very frequent basis. And so that's when I went back on medication and started to reevaluate and see what changed, if we could figure out what changed, and started to go back on medication for epilepsy.
Okay, thank you both of you for sharing that. So let's get into some of the independent living questions then. So first, two different situations like we just talked about. So the first question I have for you is after being diagnosed, how long was it until you did live independently, and why? So I know you guys are going to have two different answers because, Sarah, you said you were 13, obviously. So, but why don't we start with John with that question, please?
Sure. I actually was living independently when they came back. So I was living in another city, and I had my own place. And when the seizures came back, I was already living independently, didn't have anybody else to live with. So I had to rely on other people quite a bit. I really kind of lost it for a while. It was difficult, but I had to make a lot of phone calls. I had to ask a lot of people for help. So it wasn't as if I went and started living with somebody else right away, or, signed up for some kind of a caregiving type of program or anything like that, because yeah, I had to give up, quite a few things, but with the help of certain people I could get on the phone often, and friends to come by and visit and things like that, I was able to maintain, at least for a while, what I had. So had I been living with somebody, it would have been a big help. Had I been able to figure out some kind of a caregiving program of some sort where people could come by every day. I was never going to need somebody to live in like that, but it would have been helpful. But I was able to manage. Kind of an odd situation, because of course it was something I was not even expecting, but because, like we say in seizures, could hit anybody at any time, and
right.
all of a sudden out of the blue, there it did. It happened again.
Right. So you actually, like you said, you were calling people and you technically had a support system and you found that very helpful, right?
Yes.
People in your support system to help you. That's wonderful. Thank you, John.
Sure.
So Sarah, if you don't mind answering that question also, so obviously you were 13 when you were diagnosed, but if when did you start living on your own?
Yeah, I mean, from a different standpoint, it did still living situation at 13, because where it was like you're kind of starting to be trusted a little bit more at 13 to feel more and have more independence and things like that, than with having such a traumatic extreme diagnosis of being hospitalized and for a month and the coma and everything like that. It was a lot of covering myself, of people making sure that I was okay, people right there. I didn't have that before. But I was by myself really when I went to college. Then I was still living. I had a roommate here or there, um, and then I was living. I was living alone in 2012 when my seizures returned, and it was something that I had to think about, because for me, going from the trauma of my initial diagnosis, and I still have it now, where it's just, what if? What if that happens again? What if things change? And they could, and that's just the reality of it. And I had a lot of that fear when my seizures came back again in 2012, and so I just kind of had to face myself and reach out, like John said, for help. And for a week, there was a friend that slept on my couch, because I was scared and I didn't want to be alone. I wanted to be alone, but I didn't want to be alone. And so just reaching out and just talking about it, because it was all new again, and it was right there and in my face, and I couldn't escape from it. I just had to face it.
Yeah. But you both did mention having other people involved in your life and not, trying as much as you want to be independent. Both of you basically said, you accept, whether you accept it or not, there's people that you need in your support system in order for you to be able to be independent still. And that's okay, right? I mean, that's totally okay. Yeah.
That's hard for some people, and that's okay. I mean, that's like you said, that is hard for people sometimes to give that up and say, I'm going to have to ask for help. It takes a while to get over that for some people. For others, it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, John. Thank you for mentioning that. So anything else on that? Otherwise, I'll move to the next question. No? All right.
Not really. It just takes getting used to, you got to reach out and look for all the support systems you can. And it takes getting used to completely turning your life upside down, which sometimes it's not that severe for some people. Sometimes it is. Every case is different.
Right. So what have been some of the greatest challenges? I guess, let's focus on, living independently. And how did you overcome them? So Sarah, you mentioned, you kind of didn't want to accept it again, right? So I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but if I'll let you go first on this one. So some of the greatest challenges and how you overcame them.
Yeah. I mean, when my seizures hit, anxiety, it was all of the not. Oh, are we good now?
You were frozen for a second. I think you're okay now.
Am I back?
Yeah,
okay.
You're back.
I was just saying that, because your question again was about just adapting and.
Yep. So some of your greatest challenges with living independently, and how you overcame those challenges.
I think with me, when they started back again in 2012, it was just pacing myself and trying to not get too ahead of myself, knowing that stress could also be a trigger and that I wouldn't be doing myself any favors with that. My biggest thing has just been acceptance and knowing that things could change. They may not. They may get better. They may get worse. But just not getting ahead of myself and saying, here's what I'm faced with right now. So what do I need to do to help myself right now in this situation? And that was just being honest with friends and saying, like, hey, I need you. And, if that friend was out of town, then okay, is there another friend that I can call on? Because at the time I lived 2 hours away from family. So I didn't even have family. It was my support network of friends that were like family. And, just for the times when I didn't drive or didn't feel safe driving. I just didn't want to. Who could I reach out to? And if that person wasn't available, who's my backup person? It was just those kind of things that I just tried to kind of stay in the present moment while still being realistic that what I'm working through right now may change.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Sarah. Sarah, do you want to try turning your video off just for a minute to see if the sound, yeah. Sorry, I know we all want to see you, we really do. Sometimes turning the video off will make the sound quality a little bit better. So we'll try that.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Does it sound better?
Yeah, I mean, I think so.
You just don't want to see my face.
No, so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's weird, but it's true. It helps it a little bit. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you, John. I'm gonna turn that question over to you then. Some of the greater challenges that you've faced and how you overcame them.
Sure. I had been fascinated with teachers from about the time of high school onward, and I accepted way early that was something I really wanted to do, and that's what I went to college for. And so to have to give that up was a huge challenge. I was not prepared to do that. That was probably the biggest challenge for me. I'd say the second biggest challenge was that there were a certain number of friends, not all of them, who just really backed off and really didn't want to spend time with me because of the trouble. It's hard to look at that for some people, saying, why would someone be so cruel? But I guess I understand in some ways that some people they're scared of what they don't understand very well, and so they kind of back off. That was a big challenge. I can't deny that. In terms of the challenge of giving up the career that I had planned for years, that took a lot longer. I had to figure out what to do and come up with some kind of a plan, which I didn't do right away. And I, at one time, would have been ashamed to admit this, but today I'm fine with it. After having to give that up, I lied in bed for about 6 months and did nothing with my life. And for anybody listening to this, that's not going to get you anywhere. You can spend as much time as you want feeling sorry for yourself, which, I don't mean that in an insulting way, but it's the truth that if you lie back, don't ask for help, and just feel bad for yourself, you're not going to accomplish anything, and you're never going to move forward. And it took some time to do that. I had friends get in touch with me. I had family get in touch with me. And finally, based on some different conversations and some different things that happened, I finally got up and did something at least to get myself moving again. I got simple part-time jobs. I was a barista at Starbucks, and I was a cashier at Office Depot. To get myself out and do stuff again. That's the basic, fundamental or area where that's how I started to take care of it. In terms of making new friends and meeting new people, that took extra time as well, but it's something that if you're going to deal with something this big, you need to find other people who are dealing with the same thing. And that's not always that easy. So it took some time to do that, but I had contacted different people who were still willing to stick around and be my friend and have me introduced to some other people, among some other things. And later on, that became the Epilepsy Foundation, the office here in Madison, which my parents actually, they were the ones who went and visited them because I wasn't living in Madison at the time. And that's how that got started.
Wonderful. John, I was just going to actually ask you, you talked about getting these part-time jobs and then, getting out, but I was also going to ask, well, what else did you, there was other things, obviously, that you met other people, but you kind of just touched base on that. So thank you.
Sure.
Appreciate that. So I think this is a great next question for both of you. And I think you guys have already kind of, maybe you've already spilled your best piece of advice. I don't know. But so best piece of advice you could give to somebody who, has been diagnosed, is having, still having seizures, still dealing with seizures, but they want to live on their own. So best piece of advice. Sarah, if you want to go first with that one.
Just don't give up. I mean, it's something that my mom and I talk about sometimes, is that from the situation of where I initially once was, to where I am now. I mean, it was a pretty bleak situation that I was in when I was initially diagnosed, and when I was still, in high school. It was, would I be able to live independently? Would I be able to drive? Would I be able to work? And, here I am now. Like, I drive, I have a full-time job. My seizures are much more managed. And so it just don't give up on it. And, that's why it's part of the reason why I'm so open in sharing that I have epilepsy with other people, is because it's more common than what you think. And it's just something that people don't talk about a lot. And I think it's important. Something that I know would have made a big difference for me is if I had other resources, because at 13 years old, everything changed overnight and I didn't have an understanding of it. And it just felt like the world was against me and that no one understood. And so I didn't have an epilepsy foundation. And this was, before Facebook. And so we didn't have those different resources. And just reaching out for help and not giving up is the biggest thing.
Yeah, Sarah, that's wonderful. And I really like that you mentioned, unfortunately, you said that you didn't have some of those resources at that time, but you did say, now there is Facebook, there's online support groups, there's a number of things, your neurologist has connections, like John was saying, and you were saying, just get out and, continue. So I think that's great that you mentioned about the resources, because there's a lot out there. I do think people have to be willing to be able to go and seek them out, which is also part of it. So John, now I'm going to hand it on over to you.
Sure.
Best piece of advice?
Well, first of all, let me agree with Sarah right away that one of the things she said was it is a lot more common than you think. So for those of you listening who are dealing with this right now, please understand, number one, it is a lot more common than you think. You are definitely not alone. It's a very misunderstood disability. It is invisible in a lot of ways, and so people are not going to know that about you. So accept the fact that it is a lot more common than you might imagine. Number two, find a way, if this is an issue for you, find a way to swallow the pride and say, I need help. Maybe that sounds harsh coming for some of you listening, but you have to figure out a way. And everybody's going to deal with that differently. And you have got to find a way to swallow some of the pride and say, look, I'm not perfect. I need some help. And who could possibly do that? That's one of the things we can help with at the foundation. You can get in touch with any one of us and we can help with that. I would also say, if you're not doing anything at all and you're trying to overcome this, get yourself if you can't find a job, at least get a volunteer position and go out and do something. Lying at home, like I said earlier, is not going to accomplish anything for you. And believe me, I have no room to talk there because I did that myself. I lied at home, did hardly nothing. And even if you don't want to apply for jobs and go through that whole interview process and filling out applications, at least find a place to go do some volunteer work. There's plenty of opportunities to do that. That would be another piece of advice. And then I would also say, find some people going through what you're going through, and you're going to immediately find that you've got friends with the snap of a finger, because so many people are going to understand what you're going through. For those of you watching this as a recording, I don't know where you live, but there's definitely a way you can contact at least the Epilepsy Foundation. Every different area in the country is going to have a different one. But here in Madison, 608-665-9942, give us a call and we can help. We'll put you in touch with Sarah if you'd prefer to talk to a woman. Plenty of people we can put you in touch with.
Yeah. Wonderful, John and Sarah. Really great advice. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I know, some people probably need to hear that. So thank you very much. So my final question before we open it up to the rest for the audience is, we're going to, fast forward. So where are you now? And maybe some of the accomplishments that you'd like to share, so focusing on the present time, focusing on things that you've both have, I will say, come a long way, have learned a lot, right? So, some of those accomplishments. So John, let's start with you.
Okay. Um, when when my parents had found the Epilepsy Foundation here in Madison, I was not living in Madison. They went and visited just on their own accord, and they said, let's just see what this Epilepsy Foundation has to offer. And they met some of the staff members there and talked, and my mom got in touch with me, and she said, you know, they could offer you a lot here, but also there's something else going on. There's a clinical trial going on for a surgery that you might be eligible for. And I went and did the testing necessary, and I was able to get an implant inside my head called the responsive neurostimulator, which helped with seizures quite a bit. Uh, what I needed to also accept was that I was going to need somebody closer to me for caretaking and caregiving. And that's when I started, by that time I had started to meet other people and had met somebody who, you know, could be not only a friend, but someone stayed a lot closer. And we agreed to live together for a while. That was a huge, huge help. Not everybody's going to have that opportunity, but if you look hard enough, you know, there's some way you can arrange so that there's someone you could be close to more than just a typical friend. If not live together, you know, connect with one another on a very, very regular basis. But I was able to do that, and I was also able to go back to school. It allowed me to go back to school and try and figure out a new career, because like I had said, I was a barista at Starbucks. Then I worked at Target for a while as a cashier. I worked at a dry cleaners and said, okay, we're going to do something more, because I was a teacher. We got to try something more now. So I was able to go back to school, and I was able to do about 6 years of volunteer work with the foundation, and then I was able to get a job with the foundation.
Yes, John, we appreciate all that you do too. I think, would you mind just taking a minute really quick just to talk about maybe some of the things that you do at the foundation? I think, you know, that would be nice for people to know, specifically maybe the support group.
Sure.
Please.
Well, it would be for an adult to be a teacher who is not always aware of what's going on inside the classroom of 25 teenagers. It's a recipe for disaster, but I absolutely loved the profession. And through several years worth of work, I was able to figure out a way to put some of that to use. I'm not, you know, in a classroom teaching 25 kids every day, but I'm doing my own form of teaching. And when I was able to, as a volunteer, I helped out with a lot of things, but then, you know, as a staff member, I was able to work more one-to-one with clients, and also to host in some of the support groups that we've had. And so I've been able to do it my own way. I've created it on my own. I've said, well, I'm not going to be a classroom teacher, but I can work with people who are struggling and let them know that I'm here. I'm not going to force myself on anybody, but hey, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here. If I can't answer it, I've got 3 wonderful colleagues who I can send you off to, and they can help you with whatever it might be. But that's one area. Another area, so if any client needs, you know, to talk one-to-one, not only can I do it, but other colleagues can do it as well. But I also work with communications, getting, you know, mass emails out, as well as social media, as well as, you know, most of the activities that we do in some way, shape, or form, I'm involved in that.
Yes, thanks, John. Thank
Sure.
you. Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you then, if you wouldn't mind talking about some of your accomplishments in the present time, and maybe, you know, share a few of them.
I think for me, it's just the level of acceptance and learning how to handle the feelings that I have surrounded with epilepsy. My emotions have ranged from just anger and denial to fear and anxiety. And I finally just learned that the best way for me to deal with it was advocacy. And I have said it so many times, and I'm sure some of the people that are listening, and I know John's heard it, and maybe it sounds hokey, but I mean, really, it wasn't until I found the Wisconsin Epilepsy Foundation that I actually had a community of support, of people who understood and get it. And we were, you know, at the fundraising dinner, and I just looked around the room, the first year we went, and I started crying because all of a sudden I had it. I had that support, and what a difference that could have made in my life if I had that when I was younger. And so that's when I was like, this is the place that I need to get involved in. This is like, these are my people. And I've met so many great people, and that's something that, you know, just in talking through this, I hadn't really thought about, like the awesome people that wouldn't be in my life if it weren't for epilepsy, and connections that I wouldn't have made otherwise. I mean, that's one positive thing. It's the truth. I didn't have support of others who really got it when I was younger, and until 2015 when we moved to the Madison area. So for me, that's been the biggest hurdle that I've overcome is myself. And I think that it's still something that I have to overcome, or that I work to overcome. It's, you know, I mean, early at the beginning of this month, I reached 6 months seizure free, which I saw it on my calendar and I was like, God, that's awesome. It's such a huge accomplishment. But then other times I feel like I'm just waiting for one to hit. And I think that can be difficult because it's this big milestone, it's this accomplishment, but it's still in my life and with me every day. And so it's still something that I think about every day. And that's where I just have had to learn to channel all that nervous energy into advocacy and talking to other people.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know what just echoed. As you said, you know, advocacy, and really some of the things you mentioned also, just trying, you know, seeing the positive instead of just dwelling. And I think you both have mentioned that, you know, a few times on the call, but I think that is wonderful. And Sarah, if you want to turn your video back on, we can try for the
Okay.
if you want, for the last Q&A part, but excuse me.
Okay.
I think that's wonderful. Thank you both so much for sharing that. So we are going to open it up to questions from attendees now. So as I mentioned, you guys can type them in the use the Q&A button, or you can use the chat button as well, but the Q&A button is a little bit easier. The other thing I will say is if there's something you're either maybe not comfortable asking right now or something that comes up after the fact, you can actually email us and we can get the questions to John and Sarah, and they, you know, they can get back to you, or we can get their answers and get back to you. So I'm going to type that in to the chat for everybody so that way they can, sorry, one second. That way they can see. You know, we'll just give a couple minutes. Is there anything else that you guys would like to add, or maybe something I didn't ask that you feel would be appropriate?
I'll add something. You know, something else you can do for any of you listening who are struggling to figure out how do I overcome this? How do I move forward? Besides what Sarah and I have already said, you know, another thing you can try is finding yourself a hobby. That's something where, you know, you can, first of all, learn something new to do. And second, other people who like to do that hobby. You know, I've just started to you know, learn about maybe photography. Now, my colleague Kristen has helped a lot with that, and she's taught me a few things. It's been terrific, and I can still do that on my own. I'll go out on a Saturday when the farmer's market's been available and just have fun shooting pictures. So that's something else. And you know, if you meet people who, you know, it's kind of like it kind of goes with the cliche of don't judge a book by its cover, because you might meet somebody who also is dealing with epilepsy and seizures that are not under control. You might meet them and say, well, I could never be friends with this person. They're just so different than me. Well, at the very least, you can sit down and have a conversation with them about epilepsy. Maybe you disagree on everything else, but it's something you could at least find and say, well, I've got a good acquaintance. I could talk to this person about epilepsy and seizures anytime I want.
Yeah, that's great, John. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that at all before I get into one of the questions?
I don't think so. I think just reaching out to other people. I mean, things are hard right now with social distancing and everything like that, but that's where it's so awesome that we have the different platforms that we do to connect with other people. And just reaching out to one another and checking in. And, you know, the Wisconsin Epilepsy Foundation has their page, and there's Like one of my other favorite ones is the Epilepsy Network. They're awesome. There's so many different. So I think with that, if you don't find one that you automatically click with, or you're not getting the answers that you're looking for, or just not seeing as much, connection with people, try a different one. There's so many different ways to connect with people now, and find one that's right for you.
Yeah, that's so true. There is so many ways to connect with people. It's a lot to think about sometimes. So somebody mentioned that thank you to both of you. You're an inspiration. Thank you for sharing your journey. So proud to know both of you. That was a comment. And then there is a question. Did you consider assisted living for when you were older? So, John, you're the first person I looked at.
Okay.
Thank you.
I had about 10 years of living with a very, very close friend, probably the best friend I've ever had. And that took care of any kind of assistance. I didn't need medical assistance. The only time I've needed medical assistance is after one of my surgeries where, I would just ask him to stick around for a few nights in a row and not go out, with other friends.
Mm-hmm.
For when I'm older, to address the question, at least the way you say, if my seizures don't get any better, I probably won't consider assisted living, but I will, when I get a lot older, I will consider someone to come by a few times a week if in fact I'm still living alone. So independent living, I can still do that, but I would call some kind of an agency and just say, could we get someone just to come by a couple times a week? I would never, at least unless things get way worse, I would never need someone to live in 24/7. So in a way, to answer your question, I would consider it to some level.
Okay. Thanks, John. Sarah, what about you? What about when you're older? I mean, it's kind of interesting.
Honestly, I honestly haven't thought about it, and it's an awesome question. It's something, my wife and I tend to be really good planners, but that's not something that we've really talked very much about. So I think it's a really good question, and something that should be considered. I mean, we've definitely talked about what if things do progress, or what if my seizures do get worse, then what would that look like for us? And but that is something that we've talked about, though. But it's good to be proactive like that and thinking long term. What do your care needs look like?
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. Okay, it looks like that is what we have for questions. Again, I typed in using the chat button, I typed in our connect@epilepsywisconsin.org email. You can send questions to that email, and John and Sarah will get them, and they will get back to you.
Yep.
With that being said, just a reminder that this recording will be up on the website by early next week, so you can go to our video library and check that out, epilepsywisconsin.org. And if there's no other questions, I just want to say, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, John, so much for your time this evening and for opening up, and sharing with us. Very cool. This Q&A was a lot of fun. We haven't done one of these in a little while, so
good.
I appreciate your time. And with that, I will end it there. Have a good night, everybody.
Okay, guys, have a good night.
Bye-bye.